First, I would like to welcome everyone to the Center for Applied Economics Community Series panel. This year, the topic is the economics of COVID-19. And please let me introduce to you the speakers, the presenters of the sessions. Lee Berkman, Professor Berkman, all of us are faculty at Indiana University College. Professor Berkman earned his graduate degree from Cornell, Northwestern, and Georgetown. He's a CPA, commercially rated pilot, and he did ask me to very brief in his introduction, his very impressive introduction. 30 years as an entrepreneurial, sold his last telecom company in November of 2013 to Digicel, an Irish mobile operator. Then we have Professor Dansky. Professor Dansky has a bachelor degree in astronomy and physics and a master of science in nuclear engineering from Penn State, an MBA in economics from NYU. 30 years in electric and gas industries, focused on deregulation and the management of corporate ventures. Founder and former president of a natural gas storage and transportation company, vice president of power plant development company, head of natural gas division, appointed to the board of directors of Independent Power Producers of New York, and appointed to board of solar and wind power development company. He has written numerous and published lots of articles regarding deregulation in the electric and gas industry. Then we have, Professor Patrick Morris. He earned his Bachelor of Science in BA Nova Thousand University, Master degree in Economics from University of Detroit, certification in Hotel Operation Management, the Beverage Management and Supply Chain Management Principles. He served on the community, and he's serving on the Community Appearance Board for the city of Deerfield Beach, Florida, founder and president of Black River Capital Corporation and Cleaning Resource Corporation. Last but not least, Professor Larissa Ray. She has earned a master degree in business administration and commerce from Lobachevsky State University. Finally, I was able to pronounce it correctly. I hope I did. Russia. Yeah, after so many years, I've been trying to pronounce it, and I'm sorry about that. If I mispronounced it again, but I really hope this time I pronounced it correct. She has a doctorate in economics from Academy of Management, Tbilisi, Kazan, Russia. She published her dissertation in 2010 entitled Development and Implementation of Crisis Management in Regional Economies. So I would like to welcome all of them to this presentation. And first of our presenter will be Professor Lee Berkman. So Lee, please share your screen.
Oh, you may just need to unmute. I think you're muted.
Okay, is that better?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Okay, well, I get to start again. That's great. Okay, what I'm going to try to do is set the stage for a very complicated topic, and one that's enormously controversial. I assume some of the things that you hear from me you hadn't heard before, you disagree with or whatever, but let's get started because I think we can develop quite an interesting discussion. So COVID-19 is a new virus and first appeared in January, some say earlier, and it originated from Wuhan in China. It's like the flu in being it's transmitted primarily through airborne droplets and aerosols. And as it appeared, the initial modeling of the virus suggested that millions of people would perish in the US and worldwide. So it caused enormous concern. Fortunately, the models proved to be exaggerated, often by a factor of 10, but the initial response in the US and other countries was based on these models. And the initial stated objective was to protect the medical systems, including hospitals, from being overwhelmed. So what's the nature of the virus? Highly contagious, transmitted mostly through droplets and aerosols. Men are more at risk than women, and gradient of risk for age is really astonishing. Let's look at that. So this is information from CDC, and what it shows is the difference in risk levels. So 0 to 4 years, 9 times lower. And then as we get up toward the top, over 200 times more deadly. So for older people, and I guess I find myself in that group, especially those with what called comorbidities, there's a lot more risk. Let's see how much that is. So this is interesting. US deaths per million in COVID-19, and you can see very, very tiny in the smaller age groups. As we get toward 85 years, it becomes very, very high. Here, the ratios, again, are astonishing, up to 220 times higher. Some actually show even more. But interestingly enough, 0 to 4 years, 9 times lower, 15 to 17, 15 times lower. The comparison group, 18 through 29. And you can see that there's a very big gradient we're dealing with, an age gradient. Now, this is interesting too. Influenza or pneumonia, you can see that up to the year 14 years old, influenza for young people is much more dangerous than COVID-19. It's not till you get toward 15, 24 and up where you find that COVID-19 is more dangerous from a fatality standpoint. So the question is, what should we be doing? What are the trade-offs? What's benefit versus cost, which is really an economic issue. And one of the challenges was that it was often said, turn this over to the scientists. Well, this is not only a scientific issue, it's an economic issue, very much an economic issue. So one of the first challenges was we want to minimize the number of people contracting the virus, especially the vulnerable. The second, which seems to be primary today, is minimize the deaths attributable to the virus. This isn't easy because the way deaths are reported in many states, in many situations, if not most, if somebody dies with COVID or thought to be with COVID, it's recorded as a COVID death, which isn't quite accurate. Here's something that you won't hear much of, and many people will disagree with: minimizing the life years lost attributable to the virus. What is a life year lost? It means that if somebody had an expected 2-year lifespan, being a very elderly person, and died from COVID, that's 2 life years. If somebody is 18 years old and had 70 years and died, that's 78 life years. So you can see a weighting function there that I think is important. And fortunately, this virus is much more friendly, if a virus could be friendly to young people, but much more deadly to the elderly. So if you look at deaths versus life years lost, you get a very different answer. Minimize disruption to the economy, lost employment, bankrupt companies, lost GDP, minimize loss of educational opportunities. This is a really big deal because especially in the minority communities, online teaching has not proven very effective. Minimize deferred and skipped medical care. This has been a big deal too. Many people have not gone in for heart attacks for fear of going to the hospital. Minimize lockdown-related consequences, including suicide, drug use, family violence, myths, vaccinations, etc. Clearly, there are a lot of trade-offs depending on the strategies employed and the relative value or importance of the individual objectives. This is a multidisciplinary and a multi-objective issue. And it's not something, I believe, where you can say, if we minimize deaths, we've done what we needed to do. There are many, many other dimensions that need to be considered. Decisions need to be made with imperfect information, empirical information, imperfect science, and in some cases, I believe an undue focus on some objectives while ignoring other likely consequences. Okay, so what are the alternatives in taming the virus? First important point, if we didn't have vaccines, the only thing you were doing in taming the virus would be to spreading it out over time. Fortunately, with vaccines, and it appears we have a number that will work, that is curtailed, and it does make sense to slow down the spread of the virus. So we can limit international travel, close borders. That was done very quickly. That's kind of a high cost. Limit person-to-person contact. That depends upon. That can range from social distancing and masks all the way to extreme lockdowns. The idea is to flatten the curve. The cost is not an implementation, rather it's the unintended public health consequences. So this is an unusual cost-benefit situation in that it's not the money we're spending, it's the lockdowns and the economic and other effect of the lockdowns. Educate the public about avoiding contagion and protecting the vulnerable. That's inexpensive, hasn't been done terribly well, in my opinion. Enhance the capability and capacity of the medical system to cope. Medium cost, important, that is being done. Gather and evaluate empirical data about the virus and modes of transmission and so on. This is being done, but there is unfortunately a fair amount of confusion. It is somewhat low cost. Improve the cost availability and speed of testing. I'm going to talk about that. That's a missed opportunity. Contact tracing. That's been done very effective in some countries, but not the US. Improve treatments of the infected. Develop and administer vaccines, medium to high cost. Now, what we're going to see here is that I saw a recent paper by David Cutler and Larry Summers. All of you economists know who Larry Summers is, where he says this is a $60 trillion crisis. And interestingly enough, the GDP loss, he puts at 7.6 trillion. With those kind of numbers, spending money on treatments is easy. You're talking about multiple magnitudes of benefit that can be obtained if a vaccine's developed or if we're effective in treating infected persons. Cost analysis of the lockdowns. This is something from Dr. Scott Atlas. It's somewhat, I guess, controversial, but he talks about lost life years. And he said $50,000 per month, 50,000, I'm sorry, life years lost per month. What's going on here? What's the difference between life years and lives? Well, it depends upon the infected person. So in his view, we have lost more people due to lockdowns. It's been more dramatic than if we had done almost nothing. Very controversial, but at least something to take a look at, in that in many cases, governors have done lockdowns without really any analysis of the economics or the unintended consequences. Not too surprising given how quickly it came about. So what missed opportunities do I think we've seen? One is the education of the public. I think that it's been kind of chaotic. Initially, people were afraid to touch something, that they would get the virus from there. Eventually, we began to realize it was mostly transmitted in the air, and we had a much better knowledge of what was going on. Now, is the public aware of the vulnerability of people with underlying medical problems or elderly people? To some extent, yes. But are they aware that young people, if they get the disease, generally fare quite well? I think the answer is often no. And what happens is you hear, I know of one person who's 30 years old who caught COVID and died. That proves the point. Well, no, we don't know if it's true. And one person out of 300 and some million is not very statistically interesting. So we need to do a much better job in gathering and empirical information and improving the effectiveness of treatments. We need to improve the use of PCR testing. I think it's been a little random, but there's something called antigen testing, which has only recently been approved. It's not as sensitive as PCR testing, but it's very cheap. And actually, many months ago, I heard a medical professional say, we could do this for $1 to $2 a test. Why don't we just have everybody test every 2 or 3 days? It doesn't have to be real sensitive. If they test positive, test again, and then they can self-quarantine. This hasn't been done. It's very curious that it hasn't. Enable international travel with PCR and antigen testing. That's been done to some extent, but not as much as you would expect. For instance, the border between the US and Canada is still closed. Don't focus on a single objective, such as minimizing reported deaths from COVID. Much of that information is not entirely accurate, and this isn't a single problem of COVID deaths. It has all kinds of other ramifications. So we need to take a holistic economic and public health approach to looking at alternative measures, recognizing there isn't a science, there isn't one source of information, that this is a very complicated situation which depends upon the cooperation of economists, public health people, doctors, actually nurses treating patients to understand the best way forward. Okay, we'll talk about vaccines, and Steve Dansky is going to touch upon this. So in the absence of an effective vaccine, the virus would simply work its way through the population until we received or achieved herd immunity or not. Fortunately, we do have a vaccine, so the vaccines will help us reach herd immunity, and I will leave Steve to explain what that is. So in the absence of an effective vaccine, lockdowns would only have spread the virus over many more months or years. Fortunately, with vaccines on the horizon, that can be stopped. A number of vaccines are under development with encouraging test results, but maybe we won't see a lot in the short term. The cost benefit of vaccines is very high. I don't know, maybe 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1, but there are challenges with the distribution and public acceptance. For example, an 80% effective vaccine might need to be taken by 70 to 80% of the population to achieve herd immunity. Well, simple math, 7 times 8 is 56, that's only 56%. And we're probably looking at wanting 70 to 80% to achieve what's called herd immunity. Okay, so what should work? Well, continue development of vaccines and prioritize their administration. Who should get a vaccine first? Healthcare workers, older vulnerable people? How about younger people who seek to spread the disease? There is a lot of discussion about this, and it's something that I think takes a fair amount of study and thought. Continue development of medication approaches to treating the virus, protect the vulnerable population, and I said take a holistic approach, communicate accurate, executable information to the public, still lots of confusion, use common sense measures such as mass social distancing and the like, use PCR testing wisely, develop and use low-cost antigen testing, which can be much more frequent and self-administered, gather and communicate information on infection, hospitalization, and deaths. Don't panic. There's been quite a bit of panic, and that's not helpful. Protect hospitals and nursing homes, and use lockdowns sparingly on a selected, targeted basis. So I just say avoid catching the virus, because I just told you young people do a lot better. I'll tell you what young people don't do. What they do is they spread the virus to those of us who are vulnerable. So please don't do that. Thanks for watching.
Thanks very much, Professor Lee. Now, Professor Dansky, if you can please share your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to do this presentation to primarily talk about positive externalities. I've noticed over the past half dozen years with my students that they grasp the concept of negative externalities quite easily. You know, the classic example is like secondhand smoke. Someone else buys the cigarettes, but you in the same room wind up taking in those nasty chemicals. And so something is imposed upon you, even though you are not part of that transaction to purchase the cigarettes. I find the students have a little harder time wrapping their heads around this concept of a positive externality. And then here we are in this crazy year of 2020, and right in front of us, everywhere we are, is this classic example of a positive externality. And that is the concept of herd immunity. We've heard a lot of political sound bites about what herd immunity is. And unfortunately, I'm going to just make the editorial comment that there are a number of politicians out there who have been using the phrase either incorrectly or more particularly incompletely. So my other objective, in addition to talking about positive externalities and what they are and how we apply them, is to talk about herd immunity and what it really means and why it is an example of a positive externality. And we'll also touch on how we go around calculating marginal cost and marginal benefit. So what is herd immunity? How did it get its name? Well, we look to the concept of a herd of animals. You know, we know that so long as a herd of sheep can stay together, it's difficult for, let's say, a pack of wolves to get its dinner. That what the pack of wolves try to do is to separate out, you know, one of the sheep from the rest of the herd, and it makes it more vulnerable. And so that's where we, you know, get the name from. That, see, the more people, the more of us within our human herd who become immune to a disease, the better protected the whole population will be. And so we don't need to have everyone immune. We only need to have a certain percent. And that certain percent is able to give freebie benefits to those who are, say, still without immunity. Now, I'm going to forewarn you that, as my students know, I tend to tell a number of puns, bad ones, and you're forewarned that this presentation has a number of bad puns in it, such as the one you see here on the screen, that I could have subjected you to a painful pun if I used the word shear numbers. But let's put that aside and move on. You see, where a lot of the politicians have been omitting half of the conversation about herd immunity is that the focus has been on getting herd immunity by people getting infected with the disease. And that's only half the story. The other half is getting the antibodies by getting vaccinated against a disease. And so here we're going to apply our marginal cost, marginal benefit calculation. The marginal benefit is herd immunity. So in both of these examples, we get that marginal benefit. But the two approaches have a very different marginal cost. If we simply let people catch the disease to then produce their own antibodies, there's a high cost to that. So let's look at the flu, for example. The CDC estimates that every year, millions of people get the flu. Hundreds of thousands of people have to go to the hospital. Tens of thousands of people die from the flu every year. And for those who don't die, we still have lost work hours, and that shows up as productivity decreases. We see lost wages. We see lower GDP. And then, since this is an economics conversation, we also see lost utility, which, as you know, we know is this concept, like to use a word, of good feeling. It's also economic efficiency. And as my students know, I love Haagen-Dazs, but if I have to take money and reallocate it to buy NyQuil, I have lost utility. And so that gets cranked into our economics equation. Now, the other approach, and this has a lower marginal cost to arrive at the same marginal benefit, well, sticking with our flu example, common side effects of the flu shot are localized pain, some redness, swelling, maybe some headache. You might get a fever for 24 hours, some nausea, sore muscles. It's rare that there's any negative side effects, primarily to people who are allergic with eggs, and that's why you fill out that form. They ask you that before you get the shot. And then we also here have lost utility when money is reallocated away from my Haagen-Dazs to go pay for the vaccine. But clearly, going through the approach of getting vaccinated, we are able to achieve the marginal benefit at a much lower marginal cost. And so that's why we use vaccines, because they're able to get us herd immunity with such a lower marginal cost. So again, we're economists here, and we look at things in terms of marginal benefit and marginal cost. And so we look at the ratios of marginal cost, marginal benefit to determine what programs are worth doing. You know, when is it worth to induce more people to acquire immunity for the benefit of the community as a whole? And then we look at the concept of positive externalities, which we cover in chapter 4. And so we know from this concept of a positive externality that we achieve maximum economic efficiency when we have the government step in to internalize the externality. And the way that we do that when there's a positive externality is that we want to induce more people to purchase the item that's going to lead to an increase of the number of people who now have antibodies to protect the herd. And so a great example here is subsidizing the cost of a vaccine. And you all have seen, you walk by any of the pharmacies and you see signs like, get your free flu shots here, or have discounted flu shots. And the whole purpose of this was to make it easier for people to afford the flu shot. And by doing so, we were able to induce more people to get the vaccine for the benefit of the whole community. Now, I'm not going to go through this right now because of the shortage of time. We can certainly talk about this in the Q&A, but this should look familiar to you from chapter 4. And this is how we go about increasing the quantity, which is on the x-axis, by providing a subsidy. And so by doing this, we were able to calculate how much of that subsidy is needed to move the quantity to a higher level. Now, vaccines are not 100% effective. In fact, last year's flu vaccine was only about 55% effective. But every person who does get the vaccine, who it is effective, helps provide immunity protection in the herd for all those who either can't get the vaccine because of age restrictions, or for those who got the vaccine, but it wasn't quite effective for them. Okay. I'm an example of that. I got the shingles shot. I still got shingles. It wasn't effective on me. Okay. So what kind of numbers are we looking at when we say how many people within our society need to get immunity, whether it be through catching the disease and generating their own antibodies, or getting a vaccine to then spur their generating of their antibodies? And we see that for different diseases, it's a different hurdle. So something like mumps, the data is showing perhaps as little as 75% of the population needs to have antibodies to protect essentially 100% of the population. Whereas you look at measles and you can see we're in, into a higher number. You look at pertussis, which all young infants get shots for, and it's up into the 90s that many more people need to have immunity to protect the herd. And so let's talk chickenpox as an example. When I was young, we didn't have a chickenpox vaccine. It only came about since 1995. But yet, we have seen that through these vaccines, we have been able to reduce the number of people who die from chickenpox by as much as 97%. Now, we don't tend to think of chickenpox as being that nasty of a virus, but it turns out that chickenpox is very nasty to infants, and it's also very nasty to adults, that it can be quite deadly, and that's to people who once they're past puberty. And that's why a lot of parents, before this vaccine for chickenpox was about, what they did was they intentionally exposed their children to other children who were infected so they would catch chickenpox, because they were going through their own risk reward, marginal cost, marginal benefit calculation of, do I expose my child now and suffer whatever consequences come about now, or do I let my child get it later in life when it could be actually quite serious? Okay, but we don't do that anymore. We now have a vaccine. And what we see is that even though we can't give the vaccine to infants, no infants died from chickenpox in the US from 2004 to 2007. And the reason is herd immunity. The fact that their older siblings got the vaccine helped protect the infants in the family. So again, it's an example of the benefit of herd immunity. So don't be chicken, get the chickenpox vaccine. Let's quickly talk about just putting some numbers at calculating what the potential marginal benefits. So we just talked about we saved lives of infants. What does that mean in terms of numbers? Well, in the United States, the regulatory agencies use the amount of $10 million per life saved as the measuring stick. And this has been set, it's been affirmed, it's been reaffirmed by the courts. It's going to just very difficult to overturn. It has been challenged, and the courts have stuck by this, that people have made arguments that perhaps, well, is the life of a senior citizen who only has 2 or 3 years left to live worth as much? Or is the life of a 10-year-old worth more? And the arguments that have gone back and forth in the courts have been everything from, well, 20% of the seniors in this country live in multi-generational homes, and they're taking care of the grandchildren during the day to allow the parents, both parents or one parent, as the case may be, go off to work. And at the other side of it, the arguments before the courts have been, well, it turns out that between 5 and 10% of all youngsters will, over the course of their life, between the time they're in their middle age, 5 to 10% will be a felon. Half of that group will be multiple repeat offenders. Now, the numbers on that have been backed up by several studies that say 5 to 10%, state of Texas, University of Pennsylvania, and recently the University of Georgia, their calculation said 8%. So it's right there in the middle of that. And so that argument was used before the court. Say, how can you say that a 10-year-old life is worth more? We don't know whether that person is going to be a felon and then be a burden to society. There's been other things. So what the courts have said is, we are going to throw out all attempts to create a age-related value. And so anyone who now brings a case to court to try to argue otherwise, the saying goes, that dog just won't hunt. So of all the numbers we have that are pretty squishy here in terms of how much of the population needs to reach herd immunity to get it, how many people have been sick, we don't know. There's a lot of squishiness there to those numbers. The only number that we have that's hard and firm is, what is the dollar value per life? Because that's been set by the courts. So we take that number. We now take a look at how many people have been exposed to the virus. Maybe 10%. We don't know because of the lack of good, adequate testing that's taken place over the past 8 months. But some of the studies are suggesting that's say, not unreasonable number. Now, how many need to reach, have to have immunity to reach herd immunity? And the answer is, well, we don't know. But we do know that from that slide I showed on the other, all the other diseases, it might be around 80%. And so if we have lost 200,000 lives in the past 8 months, I'm going to say ceteris paribus, that's our famous economics phrase, all other things being equal, and you do the quick math here from those first 2 bullets, that means if nothing is done, then perhaps 1.6 million lives will be lost by the time herd immunity is achieved. And that number is consistent with multiple projections that show anywhere up to 2.2 million lives lost. Again, this is over a multiple year period until the time of herd immunity, which could be 5 to 6 years away. And right now we're on target to meet that, because right now we're up to 256,000 lives lost over a 10-month period. So again, this is ceteris paribus, all other things being held equal. But we know, and again, this is the squishy part, all things won't be equal. Viruses mutate. They could get worse. They could get better. Other drugs could come up that aren't vaccines, that are good analgesics that, okay, you get sick, but this will get you through it and keep you alive. So there's all sorts of things that will change. And again, behavior changes. People will begin wearing masks more. All these things will affect this number. But what this does is it gives us a ballpark to start with. And so let's take that 1.6. Let's go up a little bit. Let's go down a little bit. And if we were to calculate this, what it says that if we were to save 1 million lives, then we should be willing as a country to spend $10 trillion on a program or a combination of programs to develop a vaccine to minimize the number of deaths until that vaccine is ready. And if we use the upper bound, that's 2 million lives roughly, then we should be willing to spend $20 trillion to save the lives. That's the size of our entire GDP. Wow. What that's saying is that, and Lee mentioned this in his presentation, We spent about $9 billion so far on direct subsidies to help develop the vaccines through this Warp Speed program. That's a factor of 1,000 less than what the marginal benefit could possibly be. So it's a no-brainer. Doing things to, again, as a positive externality to subsidize these vaccines. Clearly, the economics are like 1,000 to 1 that this is something we should do. But there's a lot of other money in here that says that there are other programs that maybe could have been spent on to combat the virus. So let me just, on this last slide on this marginal cost, marginal benefit thing. Okay, this was a quick and dirty calculation, only looking at lives lost. I left a lot of things out of this. And as Lee said, these calculations have so much more that they need to include into the calculation. Lost work hours from those who get sick but don't die. Okay, we're also talking about subsidizing the vaccine to consumers so that more people will be induced to say, yeah, I'm going to get it. I want to get the vaccine. All these other programs, all these social distancing programs, whether it be a lockdown, whether it be a gathering size restrictions, these should be subject to their own marginal benefit, marginal cost calculation. I want to make a comment here that there are too many politicians who are saying we need to get people back to work, that all we have to do is remove the lockdowns, and they are ignoring basic macroeconomics, the ASAD model. This recession that we're having is not a supply side problem. This is due to the aggregate demand curve shifting. People are not going to go into movie theaters whether there's a lockdown or not. People aren't going to go into airplanes whether there's a lockdown or not. People aren't going inside restaurants because there's a lockdown or not. In other words, you can remove the lockdowns, but you're still going to have a significant number of people who are afraid to go into those places where you're in close contact. And you can remove the lockdown, and therefore that's not going to get the economy back to where it is. You have to shift that AD curve back to the right. So when you do that marginal cost, marginal benefit calculation about a lockdown, you need to separate that marginal cost simply and only due to the lockdown versus that which would have occurred on its own anyway, because people are just not going to go into places where they could get the disease. And that's why, as Dr. Fauci said, this AD curve is going to be shifted to the left and won't shift back to the right until we have a good vaccine. Whether we should have stimulus payments, that also should be subject to its own marginal cost, marginal benefit analysis. But a key message here is these numbers at the moment are very squishy. Okay, we need to do sensitivity analysis. We see how robust they are so that we see, okay, if I change this number by 10%, what does it do? And so we got to keep that in mind whenever we look at the numbers. And so let me just end this conversation by saying that if we want to talk during the Q&A about anything here that I covered, if we want to talk about lockdowns, if we want to talk about protecting the elderly, if we want to talk about the success of one country versus another, we can. I have data on it. But let me just say that this concept of herd immunity is a classic example of what in economics we call a positive externality. And that's because the number of people that get protected is greater than the number of people who have obtained the immunity. Second, vaccines can be a very cost-effective and quick way to get us to reach that hurdle of herd immunity. Economics gives us the tools to evaluate this. In other words, we can now determine which methods, which programs have a good marginal cost, marginal benefit ratio. And it can tell us through this concept of, again, positive externalities, when it is warranted for the government to provide subsidies so that we can internalize the externality to maximize economic efficiency. And finally, as a disclaimer, you suffer through my bad puns. I just want to say that no animals were harmed in the making of this presentation by any of my bad puns. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks. So next is we have the presentation by Professor Morris. If you can please join us. Professor Morris?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. It's good to be here with you all. You know, it's an honor to be on this panel with all these great thinkers, economic thinkers. What I'm going to talk about today is the economics of COVID-19 and how it affects lower income Americans. There was a defining moment in the Great Depression, and macroeconomics was born during the Great Depression. There was a defining moment in the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, where we have experienced zero interest rate and negative interest rate, and quantitative easing, and significant wealth gap. And now COVID-19 has manifest all of this buildup of a wealth gap. We're still experiencing zero interest rates. Now, pre-COVID-19, the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, we saw the buildup of the wealth gap. These are the key points that I'm going to talk about. We have US monetary and fiscal policies that were used to mitigate the shock. And COVID-19 and its different impacts among various socioeconomic groups. Low-income families with children are most likely to experience this kind of economic shock. And the economy as a whole, and how these trends apply. Now, interest rates are zero or negative since the Great Recession. More than $10 trillion of debt was at negative interest rates. As of 2020, a new debt was created to finance these deficits. We have austerity for the many, bailouts for the few, that creates a buildup of savings over economic investments. And we've seen over the last, at least over the last 20, 30 years, where the at least right now is at a flat. Austerity shrinks investments in the real economy and create investments in the equity market. We've seen in the midst of the pandemic, massive stock buybacks and a roaring stock market. COVID-19 is a pandemic that has created both an economic crisis and a public health crisis in the United States. Disrupt lives, businesses, push hospitalization system to its maximum capacity, and economic slowdown. As of November 16, 2020, there were 247,000 COVID-19 cases. Death. And The pandemic has now claimed more than 3 times the lives that were lost during the Vietnam War. The scale of this crisis has created a demand shock, supply shock, and a financial shock, which is different from all other major recession. Monetary policy was used to include lowering the policy rate to its effective lower bound, providing trillions of dollars to the financial markets, using various lending programs supported by the US Treasury. The CARES Act, valued at $2.3 trillion, and other legislations. Total value of about 14.5% of United States nominal GDP in the fourth quarter. So the actual real GDP shortfall in 2020 was between 3 to 4%. The fiscal policy response for increased personal income to an all-time high. We have an increase in the Federal Reserve balance sheets of $4.2 trillion as of March, and $7 trillion as the Federal Reserve start buying back all kinds of debts, corporate debts, and other debts in the real economy. You have a breakdown in the relationship between the bonds market and the falling equity prices. If falling equity prices and the yield of government bonds, and a budgetary shortfall that is projected to be about 17% of real GDP. Now, if you look at this graph, I'm going to show you a couple of graphs in a few minutes. You have a racial and ethnic minority groups are at increased risk of contracting COVID-19. You have inequities in infectious diseases. Outcomes are the byproduct of decades of policies that systematically disadvantage minority groups, Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans. Residential density for people of color, Blacks, Hispanics people, are people who live in close contact with each other, are most likely to contract COVID-19. You have poor and the lower income came into the crisis without insurance. Those people who are likely have pre-existing conditions which increase the risk of contracting and dying from COVID-19. So you look at this graph here, you can see the death rates by race and ethnicity between February and August. And over here, you will see the death rates by race and by age group. This graph shows the share of families experiencing an income shock by race and presence of children. And this graph over here shows the share of families experiencing the shock by household income and children. And you see here, non-Hispanic whites, right here, non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic with children, I'm sorry. And this graph here, you see those with less than $25,000. And over here, you see those with so what you're seeing here is those with higher incomes do a lot better in this COVID crisis. Those who have savings, the built up of savings, are better able to weather the storm. So low-income families with children. The graph above shows the share of families experiencing an income shock. Income losses related to COVID-19 are associated with a host of material hardships, food insecurity, difficulty paying their bills, rent, utilities. As of April 2020, a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center showed that 73% of Blacks and Hispanic adults indicated that they did not have emergency funds to cover their necessary expenses, compared to 47% of white adults. And these people would not be able to cover these expenses by borrowing money. Because they have no savings that's built up. Those who are less likely, those who have jobs that are that consistent with face-to-face, are more likely to be laid off or furloughed. Food insecurity among low-income Americans increased during the crisis. Half of adults who say they lost a job due to COVID-19 are still unemployed and are facing deep financial hardships. Lower incomes who lost their jobs because of COVID-19 are more likely than other high-income, middle-income earners, though they remain unemployed. So you look at this graph here, you can see the extent of food insecurity among households and children. Between 2006 and you see the spike in 2020. This pie chart here shows you most workers who lost wages due to COVID-19 are still earning less. So the economy as we knew it, COVID-19 is accelerating existing trends in the economy. The use of technology, telework. So in the short run, it creates disruption as the market adjusts to the normal pain from joblessness is not shared equally. Lower income workers who work in jobs requiring face-to-face interactions, such as retail and hospitality, will shoulder most of the burden of this shift. These groups are heavily skewed towards mostly women and minorities, according to Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at the European Central Bank Forum. So I'm going to conclude this presentation. According to Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, there's a new economy. We're experiencing a new economy. And there has to be a fundamental role for government to help those who are left behind, who have the kind of creative destruction that are set in this economy caused by COVID-19, the use of technology. So there has to be good public policies that are put in place in order to not only help the economy, but help those people who are left behind. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Professor Morris. Thanks. Professor Ray, Larissa, if you can. Thanks.
Can you see this? No? Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Larissa Ray, and I'm going to present today the impact of COVID-19 on employment in the US economy. So this particular presentation focuses on how the recession, this current recession, has affected employees among different demographic categories, age and gender. And I will analyze two key economic indicators, the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate. So in my introduction, I just want to say, like, before the recession, the unemployment rate was 3.5% in February, and the labor force participation rate was around 63%. The COVID-19 pandemic increased the unemployment rate and decreased the labor force participation rate. And even though by now in October we have a significant improvement in unemployment rate and labor force participation, still we're far away from the initial point what we had before. So in my presentation, you will see 5 key facts about the COVID-19 impact and how this impact specifically affecting employment among American workers. So fact number 1, unemployment is improving faster than projected. So in this particular graph, you can see the projection based on the Congressional Budget Office and Department of Labor. For example, they projected for the end of this year, the unemployment should be around, or could be around 8–9%. However, we know in October, the official unemployment rate declined by 1 percentage point to 6.9%. So we had improvement of 1%. However, if you do the math and you add long-term unemployed people and marginally attached discouraged workers people, the actual unemployment rate could be accounted for 12.1% in October, compared with the official rates 6.9%. Fact number 2, US job losses due to COVID-19 highest since the Great Depression. And again, if we compare data in October, 638,000 jobs were added. Definitely we have improvement of 15,000 jobs, but still it's uncomparable with the number that we actually lost since middle of March. It was 20 million jobs. Just think about 20 million jobs, resulting in an unemployment rate of 14.7% in March. In October, I found biggest jobs recoveries and losses for October. Number 1 recovery, it's leisure and hospitality. Number 2, retail, and number 3, professional business services. However, again, if we look data, we can see, for example, employment and healthcare and social assistance rose by 79,000 in October, but it's down by almost 1 million since February, 950,000 jobs below. And the biggest losses in October was government employment, and specifically local education, around 98,000 local government education jobs, and a loss of 16,000 state government education jobs. Fact number 3, the labor force participation rate decreased. So in January 2019, as I said, the labor force participation rate was 63.2%. And it has decreased to 60.2% in April 2020. This was the lowest level since January 1973, when it was 60%. So, and as you know, the labor force participation rate is the percentage points of the total population of people that are employed, actually employed and unemployed, or participated in the labor force. So in October, this indicator rose by 0.3 percentage points to 61.7%. So as you can see, we have the improvement, right? But it's still far below the February level. And then fact number 4, the impact was greater for women, non-white, and lower educated American workers. Again, in February, from February to August 2020, for female average workers, the number of worker hours fell by 19%. So part of this gender difference for female workers accounts to a high percentage of employment for women in a high contact or face-to-face occupations that required face-to-face occupation. In the gender nature of unemployment rate, female job loss rates due to this recession about 1.8, like 2 times higher than male job loss rates globally, not just for the US economy. So between September and October, the unemployment rate for women seeking work dropped to 6.7%, which was below than for men. However, if you take a look again, the whole data, women still make up only 58.2% of all jobs that were lost since February and have not returned yet. The unemployment rate by race also was unequal. Between February and April 2020, the Black unemployment, for example, rate increased from 5.8% in February to 16.7% in August. And then if we take a look, for example, October, the latest release, in October, the unemployment rate for white workers was 6% versus 10.8% for Black workers. So again, it's not even close to initial 5.8% before the pandemic. The unemployment rate by educational level. This graph, you can see charts shows the historical unemployment rate based on the level of education attained for individuals 25 years and over. And again, you can see the current as the October 2020, those without a high school diploma, for example, could have a much higher unemployment rate. So that's estimated around 9.8%. Compare, for example, with the college graduates with a bachelor's degree, which is only 4.2%. Fact number 5, state level unemployment claims are historically high still. Even though unemployment rate is fallen, state level unemployment claims are still high. At the end of September, for example, almost 11 million Americans filed a continued claim for unemployment. But still, it's around 7 million, 6,778,000 people. Jobless claim decline. Initial jobless claims filed through state programs fell by 7,000 in October. However, again, still more than 20 million Americans reportedly receiving unemployment benefits. In my conclusion, an increase in unemployment rate is the most direct, in my opinion, consequences of this recession, COVID-19 recession. The prediction of unemployment rate could be very complicated because it's pointing in many different directions. And as I emphasized, the federal state level unemployment could be different gender and racial inequality in unemployment rates, earnings by educational attainment, and etc. And the global pandemic brings a lot of uncertainty. However, we have many promising news. For example, promising news about effective COVID-19 vaccine. And hopefully we will have the improvements. So my research shows that COVID-19 recession has affected everyone, but not equally, and especially in terms of unemployment. Here's my references, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. We'll leave the questions to the end if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll just do this here. Okay, so I wanted to look at the COVID impact in the 4 counties which are covered by the college. These are the 4 counties that the college serves: Indian River, St. Lucie, and Okeechobee, and Martin County. And I want to just look at these numbers here are from Florida Health. So this is for entire state of Florida. You can see that there is a pattern here, and this pattern is gonna keep showing up. This pattern here keeps showing up that I don't. So let me just try to use the spotlight here. So the most infection, all cases, most infection is done between the younger age groups. So that's where the most infection is. Now, most hospitalization is done between the 35 to the 74, 75. And most death is done at a later age. And this pattern will keep showing up in every county. So I just wanted to look at deeper how the counties differ or are the same in sense. This is for Martin County, and again, the same pattern showing up that most infection is done at younger population. Most hospitalization here is done at slightly older, and the death is done at higher population. These are by race and ethnicity. So you can see that there is a pattern showing up. Definitely the pandemic, the virus does not discriminate. The pattern here tells us that a younger person will put someone in a hospital of older age, and someone in the hospital will lead to death depending on your age group. And so this is for Martin County. I think I went too fast. This is for Okeechobee here, same pattern. And this is for St. Lucie County. You can see that the same county is repeating, the same pattern is repeating across different counties, which is very similar to Indian River County and the state of Florida. So I wanted to look deeper at this, and I wanted to find out the impact by county and the impact by industry. This is the unemployment rate from BLS following the impact of the virus. You can see that immediately once the virus hits, the unemployment rate jumped in all 4 counties. The steepest increase was in Indian River and St. Lucie County, where it did hit 14% unemployment. Then followed by Martin County, 11%, 11.8, almost 12. Then the unemployment rate in Okeechobee hits 7.5. I wanted to zoom in and have a look at how it looks like. It went from 3% in the second month of 2019 to, in a matter of 2 months, the unemployment rate went from 3% to 14%. And that is the first impact of the pandemic showing up. Then I wanted to look deeper. I wanted to find out who's more impacted, where did it hit mostly, which industry and the counties are impacted. And I was able to look at the Port St. Lucie. So these are the Port St. Lucie numbers by industry. So I looked at the non-farm sector, information, health, education and health, mining, logging, construction, financial, leisure, hospitality, manufacturing, government, other services, trade, transportation, utilities, and professional businesses. And again, I wanted to have a closer look at this, and let's try to read this together here. So the blue is the 4th April, and that's the first impact here of the pandemic on the counties. The blue line, you can see the first impact was a minus 39% drop in the employment for leisure and hospitality. And that was the first impact of this. Other services went down by 15%. And other services include fixing machines, equipment, laundry business, dry cleaning, pet care services. All of these are lumped into other services. Financial did not get impact much in the 4 counties. Information technology, unfortunately, it has a seasonality issue at the BLS, and they tell you that it's not seasonally adjusted. So the numbers, I wouldn't rely much on the numbers. Trade, transportation, and utilities dropped by 4.5%. Every month after that, you can see the delay. Look, the government jobs impacted early on a small amount, and then it did increase. The impact got bigger as more time went by. 2 industries here of particular interest. If you are in the mining, logging, construction industry, employment did not change, kept going up, and the manufacturing industry. So it seemed that if you had a job in mining, logging, construction, you were not impacted much, and manufacturing, same too. Again, if you want to look at this differently, the 2 industries which did very well in the 4 counties, in the PSL, Port St. Lucie area, so this is Port St. Lucie. The 2 industries did not get impacted much were mining, logging, construction, and manufacturing. The one that got hit the most was leisure. And as time passed by, it did gain some jobs. Education got the first hit, and then it's adjusting again, education and health. The government is doing the opposite way. Other services. So that's what I wanted to find out. This is very important when you do policy. So if you want to do policy, and if you want to, send COVID checks or so on to support the industry. So at this point here, mining, construction did not get impact. The most impact was in leisure and hospitality and other services. Then let's go back to look at how COVID impacted the 4 counties. Cases by counties, by age group. And now when you look at the numbers, the sheer numbers here, sometimes it's misleading. And I'll show you why just looking at the numbers does not give the big picture. So St. Lucie has the highest share, followed by Martin County and Indian River. And again, the same pattern of cases for younger population. However, when you take those numbers and adjust them by county population as a percentage of county population, and which I did here. So St. Lucie County, 2.86% of the population tested positive. So the rate is 2.6%, which means every 100 people you meet in St. Lucie, almost 3 of them had the virus. Martin County is 2.13, Indian River is 2.5, Okeechobee is 4%. And Okeechobee numbers are just, going off the chart recently. And I wanted to know the 2.86%, what is the distribution? Are all of them, which age group? And this is what you see here, the graph by age group. So how did we get the 4%? Most of the 4% of Okeechobee cases, positive cases, are for the younger population. So if you are 15 to 24, you're almost 0.7%. So it's true, it's less than 1%, but if you take the 0.7, and add all of these, it will give you the 4%. So just looking at the numbers, the actual numbers, sometimes it's misleading. I wanted to look at when it's adjusted by the county's population. And that's what I did. So I took those numbers, divided, and I computed the percentage here. Again, the gender gap between across the 4 counties, for some reason, and I need to test those, I have to run tests on if it's significant or not across counties and within counties, or within counties, I'm sorry. St. Lucie West, higher share of female is infected. Okeechobee, higher share of males are infected. And it seems that it's no gender gap in the Martin, and India River, more females are infected than males. And hospitalization and death. There are lots of numbers out there which look at the hospitalization and deaths. So these numbers are out of cases. So let's assume that you have 100 people and all of them tested positive. 9% of them will go to the hospital and 4% of them, will die. That's what the numbers say in St. Lucie. Now it's 8% and 3% in Martin County, 9%, 3% in India River, 11% in Okeechobee, and 2% in Okeechobee. And I wanted to compare this to the state of Florida. One thing you should look at here is that all 4 counties are above or at the Florida rate, which means that the 4 counties here, the death rates are higher in terms of percentage than the Florida's number. And again, I wanted to look at these. I wanted to find out historically, so because this is one shot in time, this was last week. So I wanted to know historically up to yesterday, are these numbers going up or down? And so this is from Johns Hopkins. I pulled the time series from Johns Hopkins, and these are the cases, confirmed cases in the 4 counties. St. Lucie West on the top here. So the number, St. Lucie West, I think as of yesterday, almost hitting 10,000 cases. Martin County is near the 6,000 cases. India River is getting there, and Okeechobee. Confirmed cases, these are death. Most of the deaths are happening in St. Lucie West, and you can see that 350. And I wanted to look deeper at that in the sense that I wanted to know the rates. Remember the rates, these rates here, when I took the percentages. So I wanted to know if that 4% has always been 4%, or was it higher or lower across time relative to the state of Florida. And I did the percentage of so these are percentages of death as of the confirmed cases. Again, to understand these numbers, if you have 100 confirmed cases, how many of those died? And that's what you're looking at. Early on, you can see that early on, the numbers, the percentages were very high, which meant, let's take St. Lucie West. St. Lucie West almost hit the 90%, 10% early on during the pandemic, during the month of April, which meant out of 100 people who got tested positive in April, early May in St. Lucie West, 9 of them passed, but 9 of them died from the pandemic. 9%. Right now, the numbers is around the 4%, and that's what you're looking at. So that's one shot at time, and this is what we have here. So you can see that this number has been dropping. The St. Lucie West has been dropping. It used to be 9%, now it's 4%. Keep in mind that still, that's above the state average, which means that there are counties in Florida which have lower number than this. I have to study more I have to dig more and look at why this happened here early on during pandemic, why the numbers were higher, the death rates were higher. And now it seems that it's getting closer to the range of 2 to 4%. And I just wanted to give you a brief of how it looks like in the counties. And thanks for that. So now I will go back to this and share this here. Oh, okay, I have to shut down this. Okay, so the presentations, and now we have the question answer session. Before we look at the question answer session, I just want to mention this. So the purpose of this here is that's part of our mission. Our mission is to disseminate information. And that's what we do every year. We look at the current topic of interest, and then that's what we try to do. Part of what we do is to disseminate information. Before we move on, I would like to thank, in case of the students will be sitting here or not, I'd like to thank the following. I'd like to thank the Dean of Liberal Arts, Dr. Scott Stein, for support, all of them for prompt support and professional support, Ms. Julie Crosby, Ms. Erica Strobridge, Ms. Rochelle Pop, and Ms. Suzanne Seldes. Thanks for their support and continuous support. Now it's open for question and answer. I don't know how you're going to do this. Usually we have a mic and we pass it. If you have a question, please speak and inform us, tell us the question is for whom, for which presentation. Thanks. Erica?
Yep, all they have to do is just unmute their mic if they have something to say. If they would like to go next, they can say it in the chat as well if they're a little shy.
Okay, thanks. So you can ask a question in the chat. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I apologize. My name is Ryan Giebler. I am in your microeconomics class, and I just wanted to ask, do you think that the case numbers are lower in the local counties here due to herd immunity?
I did not verify that. I can go in and check. I did not go beyond that point, but that's a very good point for me to explore in the future. What I wanted to do, I wanted to look at the differences across county. First of all, I wanted to test if there is any difference between the rates across counties. Two, if there are differences, then you go in and you ask why there are differences. So you just estimate the difference in different models and so on. And I didn't go this far yet. I'm still gathering how it looks. But to answer your question, I need to remember that I'm only using what's available information. I don't have access to all the data because what I was able to get here is what's available in terms of free information data. But I will note this, and if you want to follow this with me on by email, I would appreciate it very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next question.
It looks like we have one in the chat. At what point do you think the economy will recover from the pandemic? By Adam Morgan.
Okay.
Sam, can I take this one?
Sure, please.
Okay.
I was going to ask who's willing. Yes, please.
Okay. Let me bring up some slides on the screen share. And let me scroll through. Here we go. As I said before in my presentation, Dr. Fauci had made the comment that the economy will come back to normal when there's a vaccine. And the reason is it has to do with the confidence of consumers that this hit to the economy that we had, this is not due to a shift in the aggregate supply curve, but rather due to a shift in the aggregate demand curve. So let me move to this next slide here that I don't know whether in the macro classes you've reached chapter 32 yet, but this slide's right out of chapter 32, what we call a recessionary gap. And let me say that we start at point A, and when the aggregate demand curve shifts, in this case, it shifts due to consumer net expectations being negative. In other words, if people are not willing because of fear to go into a restaurant, into a movie theater, into an airplane, and go through all of those types of consumer activities that are, say, face-to-face, that results in a leftward shift in the aggregate demand curve. Okay, in other words, we could have a shift in the aggregate supply curve, but that's not the case here. In other words, we didn't have, like in 1974, 78, when we had an oil embargo, and it shifted up the price of oil that then permeated through the economy. That's not what this recession's about. This recession, as the ASAD model shows, is due to a shift in the AD curve going to the left. So consumer expectations, their willingness to go and shop, to go into public places, shifted to the left. And so you see the arrow there going to the left. So how do we get that arrow to go back to the right and go back from AD1 back to AD0? And again, this has to do with when is it that consumers, and I'll go back to the previous slide here. Okay, it's only about when they get confidence about their safety, are they going to walk into the dental office, into the fitness gym, into the shopping malls, and everywhere else business is conducted. And again, it's not an all or nothing thing. It's a question of when does a increase in the percentage of people go and do this? So the answer to your question, after looking at the economics here and the theory, is when people regain confidence about their safety, you'll see that we will be back to normal. So once people start getting the vaccine and feel confident that they can go into a place of business and not get sick, you're going to see that AD curve start shifting back to the right.
Sam, could I make a comment?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
The issue of herd immunity, confidence, and so on is not easy at all. And the reason is there's probably a lot of immunity out there from previous coronaviruses, T cells, and so on that has not been measured and probably is not measurable. I think that if the vulnerable become vaccinated and they start spending money, the younger people are pretty willing to get out there and run with it. So I think actually as little as 10 to 20% of the vulnerable population could be vaccinated, and we might see a pretty big pop in terms of the economy. And it's based on what we have seen, where younger people go out and get ill, and it's not too big of a deal. They're just going to do what they're going to do. So I think it's a vulnerable population that needs to be protected. And once they're protected, I think we will see a resurgence.
Yeah, let me add that I agree with what Lee just said, that just because we had the vaccine coming out, hopefully within a matter of months and rolling out for a few months after that, does not mean that we're going to reach herd immunity. In other words, most of the people who get the vaccine will be protected. Hopefully, they will be doing, as Lee said, the at-risk population first. But I expect it will be years before we reach herd immunity, before we have enough people who actually get a vaccine and or have antibodies from getting their own disease. But that's a separate question from when will the economy come back. I think it'll be coming back before we reach herd immunity. It will be, as Lee said, when we have enough people, particularly the more elderly population, who are feeling safe and secure after getting the vaccine.
And I think that could be pretty soon. If I were to never quote on things I've said, but I think by the third, fourth month, March, April, I think we're going to see a big bump in terms of the improvement of the economy and the reduction of unemployment, especially if the older vulnerable population feels protected and the younger people run with it. In any case, they can be infected. For the most part, it's like a bad case of the flu or not. So it's going to take momentum, and I think the momentum could well come from the older vulnerable population starting to spend, and they're going to spend like mad because they've been sitting here very frustrated with nothing to do.
I also want to say that when Lee just said that they're going to spend like mad, a report from the Federal Reserve Bank, I think it was just yesterday, that announced that while there are wide disparities, and I think Patrick really hit it home in terms of how it has affected, and Larissa also touched on how different segments of the population have been hurt more than others. But on average, the amount of family debt has been going down in the 8 months of this pandemic. Those people have not been taking on as much debt, they're taking less. So they're going to be out there spending again. And I think once you see some of this consumer confidence, you're going to see, particularly with the rates of interest rates where they are, that people will start investing again. And I think you'll see the economy come back fairly quickly compared to some other recessions.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Joy. Thank you for the presentation. As an essential worker working directly with COVID relief funds for Okeechobee County, I can comment that the effects and demographics mentioned are on spot, at least for Okeechobee. However, we have also seen a high amount of those who have quit their jobs, not because of sickness and loss of work, but because of fear, and some due to the money available for unemployment. Do you feel that we can continue to struggle to get back to normal due to the ease of assistance? How would this large amount of relief affect our future economy?
Okay. Well, since no one else has chimed in, I think the point you're making, goes right back to what I was talking about, the shifting of the AD curve and what has to be done to shift the AD curve back out. Until that we get consumer confidence, yes, we will be struggling in this economy. And how would this large amount of relief affect our future economy? Let me just simply point that as we learn when we study the ASAD model, that when we inject an infusion of money into the system, it can have, as monetary theory points out, a future impact on inflation. I think it was Lee who had commented about the size of our national debt right now. It's only been larger due to the stimulus program. We may have another round of stimulus programs that will add to the national debt. The interest on that debt has to get paid. That cuts into the amount of money that it's got an opportunity cost. It can't be spent on other things like healthcare, and it can't be spent on other things like, say, tuition scholarships, because it's got an opportunity cost when you pay off higher interest, all the interest payments from having all of the national debt. So those will linger around a while in our future economy. The question is it worth doing? And that's where I say that's where the marginal cost, marginal benefits come into play to determine whether it is worth taking on these programs like the relief funds, even though we know they will have this lost opportunity costs in the future.
Could I say something about the word fear? Because I think that was mentioned. The public health messaging, I think, has not always been very accurate. Most people, I would guess, are not aware that something like 35 to 40% of COVID deaths have been in nursing homes. This is not a terribly dangerous disease for most people. It's terribly dangerous for people immunocompromised with underlying problems and the elderly. Once they're protected, if the public health messaging could be revised to consider that and tell people, look, this is not a deadly disease to you. If it is, get vaccinated. I think that the fear factor could really be reduced enormously and needs to be. For public health, we've perhaps used fear or overly used fear to protect people, but we can see the other side of fear as we get a vaccine and we can deal with this. That needs to be changed. Or we're going to have a problem just with lingering fear.
Thanks.
It looks like there's one more question in the chat. Why are the Black and Latino, why are the Black and Latino communities so disproportionately affected in both contracting the virus and economically?
Professor Morris, Professor Ray, if you can jump in. Professor Morris?
I could
Professor
say,
Ray?
in my opinion, because, for example, the unemployment rate initially was higher for Black and Latino communities. In February, like compare, for example, the Black community, the unemployment rate in February was around 5.8%. For whites, it's plus. I think the impact was more on the industries such as like food or service industry, healthcare, where Black and Latinas workers were involved more. So that's why we have a bigger impact in terms of unemployment rate, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe somebody would add. Patrick? No, he's not here.
Yeah. Thanks. Do we have any more questions? Okay. So then please join that's it. So please join me, everyone, to thank all of our presenters and Erica Strobich for organizing this. I'm very thankful. Thanks very much for everyone. And I think that this is taped. You can watch it later on. So we'll get you the link. We'll post the link to your classes. You can watch it. And there will be the flyer and the actual presentations posted too. Thanks very much for being here. I would like, on behalf of everyone, usually, you know, we thank everyone, but this is the first time we do this online, and we're very thankful for everyone to be here. Erica, if you want to just have the last word, thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for signing in. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And if you look in the chat, I posted a couple times a link for all students to check in, especially if you're here for a class. Make sure you click on that link and fill out that form. It takes 30 seconds and then you're done. We all appreciate you being here. We have a lot of activities for International Week, so definitely log into River Life and join us. There's more to come. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.